Welcome to Ask a Property Manager, episode number 107. Today we're going to be answering a viewer's question on whether or not you should include appliances in your rental, and stick around to the end of this video to find out what to do if a tenant wants to bring appliances after you've already included them in your apartment. Stay tuned. So we had a viewer over at whatsdrewupto.com send us a message asking us more specifically about appliances and whether or not they should include appliances, and what to do if you need to replace an appliance during a tenancy. That was actually their main question, is what do you do if you have to replace an appliance while a tenant is living in a unit? Does that appliance need to be the same as the appliance that was already in place? So we're going to start at the beginning. There's definitely some pros and cons when it comes to renting out homes with appliances already in place. And depending on the home and the hookups that you have available, you may find that you have a lot of different appliances that you may be responsible for. So depending on the home, you may have something as basic as just a stove and refrigerator. But if you get into larger homes or more expensive properties, you may find that you have, stoves, refrigerators, washers, dryers, dishwashers, microwaves, pool filters, things of that nature. So, there's no limit to the number of appliances you could have in a unit. And it really boils down to how much responsibility do you want to have here and what are the requirements in your market. So when it comes to making a determination for whether or not you need appliances in your home, there's a few factors that you're going to want to take into account. Typically, I find that under a certain rent amount in most markets, or at least here in the Buffalo market for sure, appliances are not necessarily an expectation. So for instance, here in the Buffalo market, anything that rents for under $1,000 a month, there really does not seem to be an expectation from most tenants that appliances are going to be in place in that unit. But if you try to rent that same unit for over $1,000 a month, chances are there's going to be an expectation that appliances are going to come with that unit. Or you may have some difficulty in finding a tenant that doesn't have the expectation that there's going to be appliances if they're paying that much in rent. So at least here in the Buffalo market, there's almost a line that you can draw in the rent amount saying, okay, below this amount, I don't need appliances. Above this market, I do need appliances. Really what it boils down to is market expectations. And the market expectations are definitely going to be one of the key elements that you need to examine when you determine whether or not you need to include appliances at all. So if you're looking at comparable units in your market, right around the same rent point and things of that nature, same amenities as far as, parking and garage or whatever, if you're looking at comparable units and all of those units have appliances, chances are you're also going to need to include appliances in order to be competitive as part of that rental market. So all of that said, you may also find that you see a little bit of a bump in rent by including appliances. For instance, if you include appliances in a unit where typically appliances may not be included, you may find that you get a little bit of a bump in rent for including those appliances simply because the tenant doesn't have to go out and deal with that on their own. They may not have appliances already squared away. They may be moving into a place for the first time and not want to deal with it. So if you have an apartment that doesn't have appliances in it, take a look at the market and see if there's anybody else that's renting with or without appliances, and see if they're getting a little bit of an extra rent bump for the appliances. It may make sense to put appliances in certain circumstances where you otherwise wouldn't, if it means that you're going to get that little bit of a bump in rent. And really it's going to boil down to the price of the appliances versus how much are you actually going to make on those appliances on a yearly basis. I can tell you that if you're including a basic set of appliances like an 18 cubic foot refrigerator and a standard gas stove with 4 or 5 burners on it, you're probably going to get an extra $50 to $100 a month, at least here in the Buffalo market, for having those appliances in the unit. And at that point, yeah, maybe it makes sense because you can get a little bit of extra rent for not a huge increase in expense at the end of the day. However, all that being said, the type of appliances that you have in your unit is going to vary depending on, again, going back to those market expectations and rent and things of that nature. At some point, you have to upgrade to the stainless steel appliances. The white box appliances simply just aren't going to work when you're trying to rent a place for $2,500 or $3,000 a month. There's going to be an expectation of nicer appliances and nicer finishes as the price point of your unit goes up. When you're choosing appliances, my recommendation is to try to go as basic as you can while still meeting those expectations. And the reason for that is it keeps the maintenance cost low when something breaks in the appliance. And when you have like I said earlier, an 18 cubic foot Frigidaire refrigerator versus a $2,500 Samsung or LG refrigerator with French doors and a tablet in the door and everything else, you know, that's probably going to break. It's probably going to get broken, and it's probably going to be very, very expensive to fix versus some of the more basic appliances. You may not have some of those larger expenses. When something gets broken, it's going to be expensive to fix no matter what the appliance. So if you can limit yourself to not having to worry about all of the higher end things that go into appliances, you're definitely going to save yourself some headaches in the long run. Keeping your supplied appliances in good repair is also critical to running your rental property. I don't understand landlords that think it's okay to include appliances that only half function, or include appliances but they're in as-is condition or something of that nature. If you're going to include an appliance with your rental, every single feature of the appliance should be working when you rent the apartment out. If you have a freezer and the ice maker doesn't work, you either replace the ice maker or you replace the freezer altogether. If you have a stove burner that isn't working, you replace the stove burner so that it works. These are basic things that some landlords don't seem to comprehend. If you're going to include an appliance package, every feature on that appliance package should work. There's an expectation that if they're paying rent and that rent includes the appliance, that they should be able to use all of the features of that appliance. And again, this boils back to that less fancy features thing that we were just talking about. The more basic of an appliance that you can get, oftentimes the better off you are. If you don't have a freezer that has, if you don't have a refrigerator that has a through-the-door ice maker and water dispenser, obviously that can't break. As we've said, there are certain points where there are market expectations that you have those things, but you have to control the appliances to the level of finish of the apartment is essentially where you're looking to stay there. So what do you do if you have a tenant that wants to bring their own appliances into the unit? This one's a little bit more subjective, and it's kind of going to depend on your management style. But here's how we handle it out of our office. So if we have appliances in place already in the unit, we're not going to remove those appliances. They're already in place and they're already accounted for as part of the rent. We factored those appliances in when we were factoring what the rent on that unit is going to be. Even if we did remove the appliances, that tenant's not going to see a reduction in rent, again, because we've already factored for and paid for those appliances. They're already in place. So that's not really changing anything for us simply because the tenant is choosing to use their own appliance versus using one of ours. We've already factored that in. So removing the appliances may save a little bit on wear and tear, but that's really about it. In addition, we're now left with appliances that we have to store somewhere. And depending on the property, we may have to move them off site, or they may become damaged or inoperable during the time that they're stored. Realistically speaking, we don't want to move appliances any more than we have to, so we try to avoid that by just saying, if there's appliances already in the unit, we're not going to move our appliances out for a tenant to bring their own in. So we try to avoid moving our appliances whenever possible. If the unit doesn't have anything in place, that's a completely different scenario. Obviously, the tenant's going to bring their own appliances at that point, and we'll hook them up if necessary. If the tenant has any sort of a gas-powered appliance, whether it be natural gas or propane or whatever the case may be, or any sort of an appliance that requires a vent, such as a dryer, that is something that we require that those tenants have those appliances hooked up by us. The reason we do that is because we don't want to have leaking gas lines, which, I mean, that seems pretty obvious. But we also don't want dryer lint blowing around all over the basement, and we've had that happen before in the past, where a tenant came in, they had an electric dryer, so it was just a plug-in, but they didn't hook a vent tube up to the back of the dryer, so there was literally lint just blowing all over the place. It was exhausting directly into the basement, and obviously that's a pretty substantial hazard that we want to try to avoid. So for that reason, if a tenant is bringing in an appliance and it's gas-powered or it requires any sort of a vent, we require the tenants to have us do the install on that, and it certainly reduces the opportunity for there to be major concerns, explosions, things of that nature. It's pretty straightforward, and I would recommend that you take the same tactic if you're allowing tenants to bring appliances into your unit. Thank you for watching. If you learned something today, do us a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and if you have a friend or a family member that might benefit from this, do us a favor and share it with them too. Questions or comments, drop them below. We'll see you next week.